We recently held a family reunion to celebrate my son Ezra's graduation and my father's significant birthday. It's been a nice season of family celebrations. In fact, my nephew Henry recently graduated from college, and while we were at his graduation, we had an opportunity to go to the campus art gallery to see his senior thesis. Henry's art technique uses something called automatic drawing, which challenges the artist to fully let go of their consciousness and seek something called the flow state. And it's in that flow state that much is revealed. Our thoughts, our fears, our wishes. It's what an artist, Phillip Guston, calls letting go of something inside. Looking at his artwork, I was so impressed with Henry's willingness to be vulnerable and honest about life. All of us are human. We all struggle with the voices in our heads that say we are not smart enough or we don't work hard enough. We allow others to define us. This week, and every week, my guests are willing to share their experiences and give insights into what they've learned. This week's guest is particularly good at this. He's not a superintendent, but an entrepreneur and a CEO. My guest is Doug Younger, and he has some insights into his three values: planning, passion, and optimism. Thanks for tuning in. Today on An Imperfect Leader, Doug Younger is my guest, and Doug is an accomplished technologist in cutting-edge industries such as software as a servicer, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, powered exoskeletons, implanted medical devices, advanced medical imaging, and he is the founder and CEO of 3 Steps Forward, a marketing company, and he's a lecturer at Cal State University. He's the host of Twist of Fate, a small business podcast. Going to be teaching at Oberlin College here in Ohio in a little bit. And so, Doug Younger, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Hey, it's an honor to be here. You got a really special thing going on, Peter, and your audience is very special. So let's have some fun today. It's been a journey for me, my friend.
My typical guest, as I told you a little bit ago when we were off air, is that it's a school superintendent or a district leader. And sometimes I try to invite education adjacent leaders to also participate in the podcast. And, my listeners are definitely wondering, like, how on earth did our interests sort of get connected? But here's the thing. The more I host this podcast and the more I have opportunities to coach corporate clients as well as superintendents, the more I see the similarities when it comes to leadership. Superintendents, they have to foster these trust-based relationships with teachers and principals and parents and children and their boards and the community. And you know what? Business leaders do the same thing. They have similar relationships that they must build and maintain. And that superintendents, just like business executives, they have to cultivate high-performing teams. And they have to curate a care for their brand, really. And so that's when I learned about you and started to sort of do my deep dive and listen to your talks. And I was like, man, I got to talk to this guy. So I know leadership is something really deeply personal for you. And I wonder if you'd just talk a little bit about the art of fostering trust-based relationships and cultivating those high-performing teams as a leader.
Yeah, a couple points on this. Leadership is a very personal thing for me. So first of all, I talk a lot about building a legacy is one of the pinnacle achievements of a leader. It's like how you'll be remembered when you're gone. And there's a very specific example of that for me, for your listeners. I mean, you talk about a lot of my accomplishments, but I was inspired by my father, the late Douglas Younger, Jr., who was a small business owner in financial planning in the area of Cleveland. Now, keep in mind, he didn't make anywhere near the kind of money that my company has done. But for him, small business was the backbone of the American economy. And he did it until the day he died. I mean, literally, he was in the Cleveland Clinic oncology ward working on emails and applications. And because his comment was, the men and women that go into their garages and create new realities can change the world. And at the bottom line, the pinnacle civic duty of a business leader is to inspire the world to be better. And he died on that. So my comment, first and foremost, if you're talking about building a leader, high-performing teams, trust and relationship, first of all, you got to do things like inspire people and build some type of legacy that you will be remembered for. Secondly, and I talk about this in some of my public speaking, you talked a little bit about my work at Cal State. I was a speaker at the Cal State conference called Career Boost this past year. And I talked about building your legacy with planning, passion, and optimism. And let me say that is the pinnacle requirement of a leader. When something goes wrong, you got to have a plan. Even if you have to fake it till you make it, you can't get lost. So that's the planning aspect. I would say, passion is something that I think in a lot of organizational structures you suppress, because a lot of people think, because you're passionate, maybe you're low EQ or maybe even low IQ. But the truth is, leaders have to be vested. This is not like a 9-to-5 job. It's a calling to lead. It's a calling to organize people, especially in education. And I'd say lastly, the optimism part. Like, look, it's a tough time in America. Interest rates are up, inflation's up, Ukraine war. Now we have the Israeli incident that is now turning into who knows where that goes. But the bottom line is leaders have to be optimists that we're gonna make the world better. That you got to stay glass half full, even when on your low days. Because I'm an entrepreneur and I know, look, you get gut punched all the time. But I'd say that those are the qualities of a leader. Just to summarize, build a legacy, inspire people, plan, be optimistic, and it's okay to let your passion out because it's not a regular job.
So I'm going to add a little superintendent speak for those who are listening, and that is when you talk about optimism, we use a term called appreciative inquiry. So appreciative inquiry, it says, what's going well and how do I get more of it? And that is a real mind shift for so many in leadership, because we do approach things with, God, everything's not going well, or I got to fix all these things that aren't going well. And if you sort of approach this from, look, things are okay. Like, things are pretty good. And actually, I want to get more of that. And that usually can resolve the things that aren't going so well, because you are approaching it from what's going well and how do I get more of it? An example I can give you, maybe even in your own firm, is that instead of focusing on why do people leave, right? Why is a teacher leaving? Or why is my employee leaving? Why do people stay? What is it that they see in terms of the value of your company that they decide, I have to be here because of the planning, the passion, and the optimism that exists here? I want more of it. And so that's why I stay. And so really focusing on what's going well and then trying to get more of it. I don't know how that resonates for you.
It does. Actually, I'm really glad you brought this up. About the departure, or what I love to call like alumni employees. Like they were there, but they're now alumni of the company. Yeah, no, we do a lot of lessons learned. And I am definitely a person that wears my emotions on my sleeve, for better or for worse. And I would say that to build cultures, it comes top down, and it starts with the leader, and it starts with that optimism. And it is, the more you're optimistic, the more you're glass half full, the culture in your organization will be optimistic and glass half full. And to your point, those are the key things that help you win the day. Don't get me wrong. You got to have, if you're an educator or you're in administration, right? Like, you're going to have certain metrics or your KPIs or key performance indicators, right? You got enrollment, right? You don't want dropout. Like, there's certain things that those are the keys, but the culture under you is actually what I view a direct reflection of, to your point, how you get the people to stick around. And especially, I would argue, the teachers under you that have the most talent are the ones that also have the most options. And they're not necessarily going to stick around because money, because they could profit maximize and just say, no, I'm just going to go to the job that pays the most, which there will always be a job that pays more. So I really think for a lot of your superintendents and your heads of the administrations, think about the culture you create. Think about how, every day you're solving problems. And it hurts. You get gut punched. That's a lot like
you talked about sucker punch,
but the truth
gut
is,
punch.
You've got to, don't wear that part on your sleeve. Keep the optimistic part in front of the general public, and your culture will thrive.
Right. Oh, that's great. A lot of us as school and district leaders, we say to ourselves, Nobody's calling us to say you're doing a bang up job. Usually they're
No,
calling
no.
because they're just so upset about something, right? So you use that word alumni, and I thought that was pretty interesting because I had a board member, Jim Witt. Mr. Witt was just the absolute best. And one of the things that he would say to me when I would cringe when some of my really talented people would leave, and he'd say, listen, and he was a basketball guy. His son played professional ball, and he'd say, you know who Coach K is? And I go, yeah, everybody knows who Coach K is. And he goes, Coach K, look at who his assistant coaches were, and then look at where they are around the country. You cultivate and curate this cultural field within your organization, and you elevate people to do great things. Let them leave. It's okay, because they can be the alumni. It's maybe not how you were using the word alumni, but it's how I interpret it as well. It's like, you can have some great people leave and go do some really marvelous things. And it's because of what you provided for them in terms of training, optimism, all of those kinds of things. So I just thought that was
Listen, it's a very popular theme in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The MCU is this kind of like multi-dimensional threads, or like these different pathways of fate that lead to parallel timelines. And this is what you have to think about, in my opinion, in business. And business reflects life, and life reflects actually a similar theme. You got to understand, all your employees are going to go out and do different things. There's different forks in the road. They're going to go and proliferate and become new things. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing that you did wrong necessarily. It's just choices that they are going to have to make. But I think the one lasting thing, that if you inspire them, they'll remember you. And in that sense, you've done your job. That's where, if you ever feel like responsible, and don't get me wrong, look, some of them will be unhappy when they leave. Some of them will, even, especially if you're, how do I say this? A lot of my employees said, working at a startup, or my clients say, it's a lot like a cult. You have so much vested interest, passion, money into it, that, right, yeah, they could leave sometimes feeling at a stalemate. But as a leader, bottom line is, you've done your job, you inspire, and at the end of the day, you help the organization survive and thrive.
Yeah. And I have to imagine they look back and they recognize how much they learned and how much they've grown. They don't always see it in that moment. So we talk about the job, and what I noticed, like, many people don't fully understand the role of a superintendent. And so, they get that they're the lead learner, responsible for student learning and teacher development. But what they don't fully understand is that the role of a superintendent is also that of a CEO, like multi-million-dollar budgets, in some cases billion-dollar budgets. And so they also have the role of the chief storyteller, and sometimes, it can be referred to as like a politician. So I recently heard a speech that you gave, and really what caught my attention was the topic of value. You urge the people to know their audience, to understand the needs of their audience. And that's exactly what superintendents do. Like, they must do that. If they fail to do it, there's no chance they're going to convince someone to vote for, to raise their taxes or take on debt to build a new building or a new stadium or those types of things. I wonder, would you talk a little bit about value, and then what you described as rational, emotional, and economic considerations?
I can't wait. So you superintendents out there listening, here's a food for thought for you. Create value every day of your life. First of all, that's platform agnostic, industry agnostic, personnel agnostic. Your husband, your wife, your kids, your dog, your staff will appreciate you when you create value every day of their life. And the bottom line of value is, it's not the widget. It's not going to be the program. It's not going to be those KPI metrics that I mentioned about enrollment being down. Creating value is making a community feel heard, making a student feel special, making a teacher on a bad day feel important. So the value is more than the box. It's actually the result of these things that you're doing. And it is highly critical, I would say, that every day you have to make this effort to create value, and every day is a day worth living. And that, my friends, will be how your legacy will not be forgotten. Now, I get it. Like, in the trade, I talk, the empirical theory behind value is, you're helping people in terms of their considerations, their decision, how they spend time. And there's certain ways you should think the way people rationally make decisions and how you deliver value on it. And I would say the three easiest tenets are: people are either rational decision makers, emotional decision makers, or economic decision makers. It doesn't matter what category you're in. You're going to be in one of those buckets. Like, there's no question. Like if you think back to the last time you purchased a vehicle, you or your spouse is going to fall in one of those buckets. First of all, if you're rational, it's like, hey, the price on this product, and like, we need a car and our car broke down. That's a rational thought process. Like, okay, we need to buy a car. The emotional decision is, hey, we're not buying that car unless I look good in that test drive. And some people are just built that way. Okay. And third, economically, is like, look, interest rates are up. So if they're not giving me a 0% promo, we're not doing it. Those are three drivers of decision making. And I would say, think of it this way: if you want to add value in that process, don't purchase a vehicle without involving your spouse. You better test drive it. You better check the pricing, and you really need to look at, do you really need it in a particular point in time? Those are kind of in this analogy of, if you're going to create value in that particular situation, that's how you're going to do it. And then I think for a lot of superintendents, try to think for your teachers and for your students. Are you helping them rationally make decisions in their particular worlds or life? Are you helping them, with their emotions when, certain incidents happen? I mean, obviously there's a lot of fear and concerns about potential threats of violence in schools, and even economically
from the curricular materials that teachers are using. I mean, it has never been harder to be a teacher than it is today.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
You're raising really good points in terms of nobody went to school thinking about. Actually, I'll tell you this: when maybe about 10 years ago, I went to speak to undergraduates at the University of Missouri about those who were going into the teaching field, and we were doing a whole conversation about intruder training, and they were just shocked. And then 5 years later, you're talking about intruder training. They're like, oh yeah, we already know all this, because how unfortunate in our world that we've had to now live in a world where that is like, oh yeah, I either run, bar the door, throw things, and you're going, okay, when did this become part of our training? And then now curricular materials. So yeah, I really appreciate the thought about really attending to, when we talk about value, that emotional piece. The only thing I would also add is, we often in the school world, we say, what is it that someone wants, or what is it that someone's trying to get away from? So when we look at the behavior of a child, we say, what are they trying to get, or what are they trying to get away from, in terms of why they're behaving a certain way. Mm-hmm. And so you've really sort of deepened sort of thinking about this from that rational, emotional, and economic consideration in terms of the adult behaviors as well. So I appreciate that. In my book, and in the leadership model that I use to advise others, there's a dimension. It's called nested patterns. And that's really like the muscle of an organization's work. And inside that dimension, there's a term, high levels of collaboration. And I know from what I read about you, you talk about 2 steps back before moving 3 steps forward. And in that 2 steps back, you stress the importance of creating things with others and avoiding the impulse to go it alone. And I'm really curious, from your perspective, would you talk just what advice might you give, or what advice do you give others when it comes to the importance of collaboration?
Yeah, this is a great question. If I were to kind of elaborate more on my thought process, a lot of people look at business, corporations, and even schools as competitive. Like, a lot of you superintendents out there are going to say, like, hey, our test scores need to be competitive versus other schools in your district, right? But see, what I've learned through entrepreneurism, I have a different philosophy. Actually, it's not so much more competing. It's really more about cooperation. So when you're going to do, especially when you talk about entrepreneurism, and you bring this point up earlier, that as superintendents, first of all, you're behaving like an entrepreneur, whether you realize it or not. You are in some ways operating like an autonomous business in some, you have a budget, you have an objective, you have a team. Like, it's not that different. My comment is what I've learned in 4 years of being, first of all, a Black business owner in Silicon Valley. I bootstrapped my company from nothing. I similarly to creating value every day of my life, I also cooperate and collaborate every day of my life. A lot of individuals, as part of their instincts of fear, will move into a situation of, I can do this alone. I can do this by myself, or I need to compete and beat the other person, when it's actually quite the opposite. If you're a superintendent and there's a school district and they have better test scores than you, I would say it's more better to collaborate and ask the question, what are they doing that we're not? How can we learn from them? Take some of their faculty members and say, no, I'm not poaching you. I want some communal shared thinking to bring some of the good things that you're doing to our school district. And hopefully in turn, they will reciprocate and they will bring your thought process to their district. At the end of the day, humans as a species, we're communal species. And I really think that you're going to find greater meaning and greater success when you don't go at it alone, when you actually start to collaborate. And it's kind of probably odd for people to hear that from a business person, but you have to understand that, similar to, I'm married to a physician, and they have to take the Hippocratic Oath and they have to observe medical ethics. Whereas in business, there is such a thing as business ethics. And if you get down to the core of what true business is, it's mutual transactional relationships between two parties. So this is actually a normal function, life, business, education. So embrace it, hug your neighbors, don't compete with them, like go, and just make the world better.
All right, last question for you. This is a question I ask every guest who comes on my show. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate with you?
So actually, I have a lot of reactions to that. Like I'm particularly triggered. And let me tell you why. One, when I started my career in corporations, I'd say the pinnacle achievement of any business person is to become a leader of a department, leader of a function, vice president, CEO, and founder. And you should know this. I used to say, I never, ever want to be CEO. I used to say that. The reason why is because
what happened?
Oh, no. I used to say this.
Here it comes.
I used to say this. And the reason for that is because I felt the expectations on that role required perfection. And I always viewed leaders as perfect people. Now, obviously, as I started working with them, I started seeing, no, they're quite human. And later on, as you can see, as a twist of fate, pun intended, I became a CEO. And I can tell you that I'm not perfect. Now, I think perfection is an aspiration to strive for. And I think it's the pinnacle responsibility for a leader to try to be as perfect as they can. But at the end of the day, I think, to answer your question, the imperfect leader is the perfect title and name for what a superintendent, what a school district head, what a president in any administration, and any business leader, guess what? It's acknowledging your faults and being able to pivot and to be able to, help others even understand that you're imperfect. And that means you're going to have to lean on your staff. That means they're going to have to lean on you. And it's more of I think leadership in its purest sense is more of it's a shared responsibility and camaraderie between those that believe in you and that you believe in them. And that means it's okay to be imperfect. And, I like I said, I think that earlier in my career, I viewed that leaders were all perfect. They're not. And I think in, hindsight, now that, I am a CEO and a founder in my own right, I can tell you that I'm definitely a fat old dad that's tired, weak, overworked, but nonetheless, I have to be great. And in those moments that you mentioned, like at the Cal State East Bay keynote, or as a podcast host, or for my clients, I have to rise to the occasion. And it takes a staff to do that. It takes my people to do that. It takes It takes my community to do that. Where would I be with my wife? Where would I be with my kids? And that is the imperfect leader.
My guest again was Doug Younger. Doug is the founder and CEO of 3 Steps Forward and the host of Twist of Fate, a small business podcast. And Doug, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, your energy, or should I say your passion, right? And for helping me connect business leaders with the CEO side of a systems leader like a superintendent. Thank you for talking about collaboration. And the only thing that I will probably have to delete from our conversation is the word pivot, because if you're a superintendent in this world right now, post-pandemic, that word pivot was something that makes us all like get into a corner and get into fetal position. So we prefer the word mid-course correction, because a pivot is a very scary word these days.
Mid-course correction. I stand corrected. I'll use that.
There it is.
I like it.
Hey, thank you so much for your time. I really, really, really am grateful for it. Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created the Daruma doll butterfly artwork. Imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It is a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. And I'm proud to be an imperfect leader, so I hope you'll join me next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader. Leadership in After Action.